This case takes place in London. Stephen Port, from an early age, kids would say that he was different. A lot of kids would pick on him, or some kids actually thought that he was deaf because they said he didn't really communicate like other kids would. And there was one kid that would say like they wasn't best friends, but he tried to make him feel better with other kids picking on him. Stephen lived with his parents, and he was also a chef, and he actually appeared on a TV show as a chef. He started going on dating websites to meet young men because he liked young men. And he was 40, getting close to turning 40, but he liked younger men. So what he would do is he would like take pictures of like when he was younger, and then were the pictures he would use so younger guys would think that he was younger. And he would have like, he would come up with different backstories for himself. He never really told the truth of who he was. This is where he met Anthony Walgate, who was 23. And so they decided they were going to meet up. And so the plan was that they were going to meet up and go to Stephen's house. Well, Stephen ended up drugging. He ended up drugging Anthony. And it was a drug called GHB. So I don't know if he meant to, or if he just thought he's gonna pass out, and which is either way disgusting. But I don't know if he just thought he's gonna pass out and I can have my way with him. I don't know what fully he was thinking, but either way, he gave Anthony too much and it killed him. So Stephen keeps Anthony in his apartment for a little bit, not long, and then he ends up moving his body, and he calls 999 and says that he makes it like he just stumbled upon his body, like he's not the one that did anything, that he just stumbled upon his body. And he says that he found a bottle of GHB. So he's like, he must have overdosed. So, but he tells the police that he's got to go because he's got to go to work. He's in a panic because he knows that if they find out that he was with him, he knows that it's going to look bad. So, at first, they do question Stephen, but they're like, I guess the police are like, well, everything's fine, which is crazy. But at first, they believed him at first. And he was still going on dating websites. And this is where he met Gabriel. And I'm afraid I'm going to say his last name wrong, but I'm going to try to attempt it because I don't want to disrespect, but I'm going to try to say his last name right. Kavakian, Gabriel Kavakian. And Gabriel was 22, and he hadn't been living in that state for long. So, and Gabriel was he was a smart kid. He was going to college, trying to do, the right thing for himself. And so, him and Steven meet up, and Gabriel actually ends up staying with Steven, like living with him for about 2 days. And the neighbor would say that Gabriel had told the neighbor that he was kind of creeped out by Steven. And that's what the neighbor said. That Gabriel had told the neighbor that he was scared of Steven. But just like with Anthony, Steven would give Gabriel GHB too. And then he would move his body to a cemetery. And a dog walker who was just walking her dog would end up finding Gabriel's body. So now there's 2. And they died in the same fashion, and police are still not putting 2 and 2 together. They're saying, oh, it was an overdose. And the family's not buying it because they're like, Gabriel was against drugs. He wouldn't do that. But the police in this situation are just not a really big help. So then not long after, Steven meets a young man, and his name is Daniel Whitmore. And Daniel is 22, and he ends up doing the same thing to Daniel, meets him, gives him a high dose of GHB, and then moves his body again to the same place. And the same dog walker that found Gabriel's body also found Daniel's body. But this time, with Daniel's body, there would be a suicide note. And in the suicide note, he would say that he can't go on because he's the one that killed Gabriel and gave him the drug. And he also says, don't blame the guy I was with the other night. Which is crazy, because who would say that? To me, it's like someone trying to make it like they're not responsible. So Steven wrote this letter trying to pretend to be Daniel and trying to pretend that just Daniel couldn't go on anymore. And again, the police bought it. Again, they didn't think nothing of it. But the thing was, from Anthony, they started finding something suspicious. The fact that he had bruises, and Stephen had changed his story so many times of what happened to Anthony. So finally, Stephen doesn't say that he's the one that did it, but he does say, oh, well, Anthony was at my house. But he doesn't tell the whole truth, just that he was at his house. So, Stephen goes to prison for 2 months. Just 2 months. He ends up getting out. And this is where it gets sad, because Jack Taylor, the last victim, it could have been prevented. But because the police, it wasn't. So he meets Jack Taylor, and there's actually footage of them two walking together. And so that's one of the ways they know that they were actually together. So the same thing happens with Jack. He ends up giving him a fatal dose of GHB. Takes him to the same graveyard as the other two. And the families are coming together, and they're like, something just isn't right. And Jack Taylor's family is asking questions of the police. Like, they're wanting to know, like, what happened to the other bodies that were found at the graveyard? How did they pass away? So the families were a big help in this, because they really wanted to bring the killer to justice. They knew something wasn't right. They knew something was wrong. And so a year goes by. It takes a whole year. But there's a lot of pressure on the police now. So they end up looking at the footage to find that Stephen and Jack were together that night. Like, it's on surveillance camera. So they call Stephen back in. And they go to his home and they take his computers. And they find some stuff that's disturbing. They find that he was looking up men basically raping other men unconscious. He was just searching weird stuff. So when they ask him about the man, he claims they wasn't his type. That's what he claims. Like, that they wasn't his type. Finally, he confesses. And he ends up getting life in prison. then his ex-boyfriend would come forward and say that some of the men actually look like him, and that at the end of him and Steven's relationship, that Steven was just really controlling, just not a good person to be around. And a lot of people would say he was also very childlike. But the ex-boyfriend didn't know he was a killer until he searched his name, because the boyfriend had thought that he was actually going to be doing a documentary about a serial killer, not that he was actually a serial killer. So the boyfriend was kind of in shock, but also said, now looking back, like everything kind of makes more sense. The police were basically, a lot of people didn't like how they handled this case, and rightfully so. There was a lot of people saying that they were homophobic because they just acted like they didn't care. There was a lot of people who said, had it have been a woman, that would have been different. They would have wanted to find out sooner. They would have done more. But it's a sad case, and it's good that he's in prison and can't hurt anybody anymore. It's sad it took so long. Tell me what you guys think about this case. And thank you guys so much for watching. God bless you all.